All right. It is Monday. It is 7 o'clock, and that means it is time for the Split Decision here on YouTube Live. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew Newman. It is Monday, August the 10th, 2026. We are back after a week off, this time for no particular reason. It's August. It's still a bit of a slow time for sports. Figured I would take a down week, and while we're on that subject, I guess the plan as of now, do a show this week, obviously do a show next week, which is the 17th, take the 24th off, and then we'll come back for the 31st, and then the 7th, and by the 7th, we will be well into the swing of things, at least with the college football season. My first Army game is on Saturday the 5th at the refurbished Michie Stadium. My digital tickets came last week, and then for the first time in years, I got like the first couple of years I had season tickets, they were physical tickets, and they would come in a book. And, I've said for years, I'm glad I got that for a couple of years. By now, I would want the actual tickets to be digital tickets, but I'm glad, this is another thing that maybe is generational or whatever, but I'm glad I still got for a couple of years the experience of having a page full of tickets and tearing tickets out of a page. It was just kind of cool. By now I'd want them to be digital, but I do wish they still would send me the book and everything, not with with everything but the tickets in them. But the last 6 years, all I've gotten is the digital tickets, and then they would send me literally just 6 parking passes thrown in an envelope that usually came about 3 days before the first home game, just when I was starting to freak out. And I still don't have the parking passes, but this year they did send some random swag, I guess you would call it. So there's a clear bag, which is the not so subtle hint that that's what they want you to bring into the stadium, is a clear bag. And then just a little pin and that kind of thing. So, I haven't thought a ton about Army football just yet, outside of the context of trying to, organize my schedule around who's going to which games. And it's one of those things where, needless to say, especially when it comes to the Giants and now the Knicks and, the Yankees, these are 12-month a year on my, top of mind for sports, obviously the NFL in April, the draft and whatever. It's I'm always kind of thinking about in the context of my sports teams, and then there's teams where the Islanders, where I'm just kind of a casual fan. I wouldn't say it ever builds up to a serious passion level. During the season, I'm pretty damn passionate about Army, especially when I'm at the games. They definitely ruined a few Saturday evenings into Sunday for me last year with the way they blew some games that I was at. And even road games, I've definitely found myself being pissed at them blowing certain road games in recent years. But, I kind of, once it's over in late December or whatever, this year it was after the bowl game at Fenway, I kind of put it out of mind, and then all of a sudden September rolls around and I'll be angry at the play calling 4 weeks from now, or actually a little less than 4 weeks from now, and when they, run a shotgun up the middle on 3rd and 3 and don't gain any yards. And I'll be freshly pissed off with the passion that's been gone for several months. But while we are still very much in kind of the dog days, although there's some interesting stuff happening and will happen very soon. And I think the added wrinkle of how late Labor Day is this year, that week 1 of the NFL season is still more than a month away. Like the first Sunday of the NFL season was still 5 weeks ago from yesterday. I think the season actually starts 4 weeks from tomorrow, or 4 weeks from Wednesday, because they play that Wednesday game this year. But, as we start to get into double-digit days in August, it feels closer and closer, but it's still not super close. Now, we did have the first preseason game this week, past Thursday night. We had the Hall of Fame game. Everybody will play their first preseason game this weekend. The Giants, I believe, will play Minnesota at home. And there'll probably be games Thursday through Monday. And, I always say, well, I don't want to say I always say the me of there was certainly a time period, I would say probably from 2004 when I really stepped up in being a diehard, 2003, I guess, to probably around 2012, 2013, where if at all possible, I was watching every Giant preseason game live. I was making sure to get as many Giant preseason games live as I could. I will watch more preseason football than I will watch preseason anything else. But still not, I will watch all of each of the Giants 3 preseason games, but I'm not going to go out of my way to make sure I watch them live. I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm bringing it up just because it does in fact start in a couple of weeks, but or in a couple of days rather. But obviously this is a very weird, from just a sports fan standpoint, for me, a very unique time. The Knicks played into mid-June and won a championship. And for, damn near a month, that was all I really wanted to, from a sports standpoint, that was what I wanted to talk about, think about, hear about. Obviously the Yankees have been playing this whole time, but the Yankees are for the Yankees, this is about as unnoteworthy a season. They're pretty good. They're going to get a wild card. We'll talk more about the Yankees later. I'm not hand waving that, but they're pretty good. They'll be a playoff team. They're, every week that goes by, it seems like a longer and longer shot to win the division. You have to imagine with the way the Red Sox have played, they're going to get passed by Boston. But there hasn't been too much to get crazy about one way or another. If they were terrible, there'd be a lot of stuff to get wound up about. And obviously if they were, winning every day and, or even in a dogfight for a division or anything, it'd be, something to comment on, but they're just kind of going through their motions and, winning most series, but, kind of scuffling along right now. And, and all of that. And like I said, we'll talk more specifically about the Yankees, but it's not like I've been, living and die, probably a combination of the current version of this Yankee team. And then more importantly, just, coming off the sort of climactic ending of the Knicks season. It's been on a little bit of a slow boil, and, go back to February or whatever, when the Giants hired John Harbaugh, and I was obviously, and I feel the same way about it now that I do then, which is that I'm excited about it. I think the Giants did a really good job. But it's not like I've talked, it hadn't crossed my mind a ton. And then for whatever reason, it was actually last Sunday, because we didn't do a show last Monday, so I didn't get to talk about it yet. Maybe it was that it was August and just sort of subconsciously I was connecting the dots. But Sunday morning late Sunday morning, I went for a little bit of a walk, hike in the woods kind of thing. And for the first time, I just kind of the thought popped in my head, oh yeah, not too many more Sundays before football season. I'm excited for that to get going again. And that was sort of the first time that thought had popped into my head, in quite a while. So, still, I understand, still quite a ways to go. We have, I think that first game is whatever that Wednesday night is. That might even be a month from tonight. Let's actually check. And ESPN NFL scores. It's going to give me the preseason first, obviously. First game is actually the 9th. So it's Wednesday night, the 9th. Oh, and there's a Wednesday and a Thursday game. I misspoke. There's no Friday game. So, yeah, Super Bowl rematch on Wednesday night, September the 9th, between the Patriots and the Seahawks. And then the next day is the game in Melbourne, Australia. It's the 49ers and the Rams. And then we get going on Sunday with a full slate of games. But, obviously, so that'll be here before you know it, but it also is still kind of off in the distance. For the Giants specifically, obviously we expect a little bit of an improvement in both long-term outlook and short-term results. This year, I think I'm far more bullish on the long-term outlook of the organization than I am about the short-term outlook of the, ability to win and lose games this year. We'll just talk about this for a few minutes and then we'll kind of move on. But, the Giants have been training. I guess they just finished their training in West Virginia. And now they come home for the second part of training camp, which is in East Rutherford at the I almost just said the Timex Center, which it hasn't been since like 2013, at the Quest Diagnostic Center. They play at home this Saturday, and then the Saturday after that they're down in Miami, and then they play the Jets on August the 28th is the third preseason game. But just sort of looking at the Giants' early season actual schedule, we've talked a lot about that week 1 game against the Cowboys and what an opportunity it presents for the Giants. If they lose that game, I'm not saying that makes the season a disaster or that they're, proves that it's the same old Giants. Now, if they lose 40-0 like they did a couple of years ago, coming off that playoffs season where they won the playoff game in Minnesota and actually had some high hopes, and that first week the Cowboys beat them back into reality was almost what that was. And I think, not to relitigate a football game from 3 years ago, but it is August. That was the first game of the 23 season. And I'll never forget it because the Giants in 22 had started off really good. It was Dable's first year. They'd started off really good, and they'd kind of petered out towards the end of the year, but they'd done enough. They had 2 games with Washington at the end of the season, and they tied them, and then they beat them. And then they played a really good game against Minnesota in the third to last week of the season. And then they beat the crap out of the Colts with the playoffs on the line. And then they went to Minnesota and won in the wild card round. And, the Eagles blew their doors off. The Eagles went to the Super Bowl that year. And there was some thought of like, okay, make of that year what you will, but the needle is obviously pointing up. And then they got beat so bad in that game that night that it almost invalidated the year before. It was such a bad beating. I'll never forget, they went down the field and they'd signed Darren Waller in the offseason. And they went down the field, and I think they hit a big play to Waller, and they got down the field and they didn't score, or there was a turnover. And then the Cowboys just right away, I think the Cowboys ran an interception back for a touchdown or something like that. And then the route was just on. And then within a couple of weeks, they were 1-5 or whatever. And that was the end of it. So, obviously if the Giants get beat that badly on the first game of the year on national TV, it's not going to feel good and it's not going to portend well. But in reality, if they lose that game, 24-13 or something like that. Like, I'm not even talking a down to the wire game, just a, sort of run of the mill, lose by a touchdown and a field goal kind of games. I don't know that that's going to be cause for any kind of panic. Whereas if they win that, if they play really well, People, if they play really well and lose a close game, people will be excited about that because it's the most fight they've shown in a situation like that in years. I know they beat the Cowboys in the last game of the year last year to screw themselves out of draft positioning, but that game didn't mean anything. This would be the first time they've beaten the Cowboys in a game that means something in years. And as usual, the Cowboys are, a team that everybody's very bullish on in the preseason. So it would certainly, a victory there would certainly set them up for a good amount of momentum early in the season. Now, in week 2, they play the Rams on the road. Most people consider the Rams to be the best team in the NFL. Got to the NFC Championship game last year, lost to Seattle, their division rivals. Obviously, Seattle's going to be reloaded again this year, but the Rams are sort of the Rams are really the team that, and I'm guessing in a month or 4 weeks or whatever, when people's Super Bowl predictions come out, the Rams are going to be the team that most people pick to win the Super Bowl. They're going to be the team that most people pick to represent the NFC. Obviously, the people who picked them to win the Super Bowl will also pick them to represent the NFC. I would guess 95 or more % of the predictions you're going to see are going to include them in the NFC Championship game at the bare minimum. Maybe not the Seattle area writers, but and again, I'm not sold on that. I'm just saying from perception standpoint. So, the flip side is obviously if the Giants lose to the Cowboys in week 1, they're going to be staring at 0-2. But let's say that even happens. The little run they have after that, they're home back-to-back weeks in late September and early October. And I promise we're not going to go through every game of the Giants schedule. We'll just go up to the bye, which is 7 games. They are home for for Tennessee in week 3 and for Arizona in week 4. And then they go to Washington in week 5. They're home against New Orleans in week 6, and then they're at Houston in week 7. Depending on, and again, I understand you could look at that and most teams are looking, if you're a Titans fan or a Cardinals fan or a Saints fan, you're looking at that and saying, oh, the Giants is a very winnable game. I get that, and that's totally fair. As I look at that, though, and I see Tennessee, I see Arizona, I see Washington, I see New Orleans, 3 of those games are at home. I feel like Washington making the NFC Championship game 2 years ago is going to get pointed to for several more years as a sign that if everybody's healthy, maybe I will live to regret this, but so far in the last, 7 or 8 years, the Commanders have had one good season. It was 2 years ago. Last year, they came crashing back down to earth. If they if they have another bad year this year, a double-digit loss year, we're going to have to acknowledge that year was a bit of an outlier as opposed to saying that these last 2 years have been the anomaly. But, we'll see what happens. I'm not guaranteeing that, but we'll see what happens. But I look at this and I see a real chance for the Giants to be 3-4, 4-3. Let's say this. 3-4 is a realistic expectation for them after 7 games. 4-3, I think, is a would be very good. Would be very, very positive sign. And then in the back half of the schedule, it does get tough. You're gonna have the Eagles twice. You're gonna have Jacksonville, who's a good team. You have Seattle, the defending Super Bowl champions. There are good teams on that schedule. But again, for me, the goal, that bye week is November the 2nd, I guess it would be, because the season starts so late. If they can come out of that bye week still playing relevant games, that would be great. And, the schedule seems to line up to have some games that are certainly winnable games. And, I think the thing you talk about with the NFL and you look at it, I'll pull up that 2023 Giants team. It was a bad team. And I have a feeling this might be a bad example, but I'm going to go with it anyway. And I'll explain what I'm doing here in a minute. So the 2023 Giants went 6-11, right? Which is one of their better recent years. 40-0 to the Cowboys in week 1. Obviously, well, see, I picked a bad example. But all right, let's even say this. So that team was 1-4, and their 4 losses were all blowouts. But after that, they beat Washington to get to 2-5. They lost to the Jets by 3 points. They beat Washington. They lost to the Patriots. They beat the Patriots by 3 points. They lost to the Packers by 2. They lost to the Eagles by a touchdown. They lost to the Rams by a point. Like, I'm not saying, the 2023, and let me actually see, because even though that was a bad year for them, or a better year record, like the 2014, which went 3-14, had plenty of games where they lost by 3 points, by 5 points, by 9 points, by 8 points. Like, the margin of error in the NFL on any given week is very slim. Now, again, if you go 3-14, you're not a good team, no matter if you lost every single game by 1 point. Like, nobody's arguing you're a good team. The argument is some of these games that in prior years may have been toss-ups or 1 or 2 points either way in terms of, like, on paper. The Giants, in a lot of those instances now, are going to have a better coach. And a better coach can make the difference in a couple of those games. So, it all remains to be seen, but I just feel like, for me at least, there's reason to be optimistic long-term, but even in the immediate term, week to week, I feel like they're going to be more competitive, even if the record is not good. I feel like if it's close in the fourth quarter, I feel like the coach is going to give them a fighting chance, more so than has been the case in at least a decade. Certainly going back to Tom Coughlin, and even the last few years, I thought Coughlin was not lost it. Like, when you say a guy loses it, you're almost implying he's losing it. That's not what I'm saying, but you get to a point where these guys just maybe aren't as on it or cutting edge or, as far ahead of the pack as everybody else was. And, I think that might have been the case with Coughlin the last couple of years, coupled with just not having very much talent. But, that's just sort of what I think in terms of the Giants this year, and I reserve the right to be wrong. But I'm just, for me, kind of looking at it, I'm like, from a sports standpoint, I'm looking forward to a month from now where I have, sort of the week in, week out drumbeat of the NFL to look forward to, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Let's take our first break. We'll come back. We'll get into other stuff. Again, these August shows are a little all over the map. If you want to call in, 845-416-8704 is the number to do so. Otherwise, we'll be back in just a couple of minutes to keep things going on the Split Decision on YouTube Live. here live on the Split Decision on Facebook Live here on this Monday, August 10th, 2026. It is a little after 7:30 here in slowly darkening Shelton, Connecticut. We had the with the news on yesterday, like the Sunday morning New York City news, right as it was ending. It was like 10:25 or something. I think I was getting ready to watch a little of Meet the Press, and the weatherman was saying that night, so last night in New York City, was the last post 8 o'clock sunset until next May. And it was a little bit depressing. And as I look here tonight in Shelton, Connecticut, the sunset is at 7:58 p.m. So yes, we are past the days of post 9 o'clock sunsets for a little while, for quite a while, unfortunately. And we will start heading in the opposite direction. And this is one of those where I don't know if I've changed my tune in the last few years, because I was always, I kind of agreed before it was a subject of people actually considering doing it. I would always say, like, why don't we just always have daylight savings time? Like, why isn't it just like, why do we ever come off the time we're on now? By the time we get to November and it's getting dark at 5:45, we, for some reason, lean all the way into it and make it dark at 4:45. And, I always hear people talking about the buses and whatever. And it's like, when you don't have kids getting on the bus, you don't care about that. And then, you've heard then when it started to actually gain ground as a suggestion, some people started pointing out that I guess like sleep scientists or whatever say we should always be on standard time. And let's not get crazy. You know what I mean? Like, let's not always be on standard time, because I personally think the fact that in June there are nights where it gets dark out at 9:05 is nice. If we were on standard time right now, we're in August and the sun would be setting at 6:58. So like you would get, by the time you got, by September rolling around, it would be like we think of as like mid to late November now. So, thanks, but no thanks on that. But people have pointed out that like going to full-time daylight savings time would lead to certain areas, and it's not like a straight up and down, it's sort of like diagonal. Like there are places where like during certain times of year the sun wouldn't rise in the morning till like 9:45, and I'm like, all right, that I can see the point of that. So it's one of those where I'm like, I'm definitely not willing to say don't have daylight savings time at all. And I don't know that I myself personally would be outraged if they went to permanent daylight savings time. But when it's one of those, you kind of go, oh, this status quo that is seemingly so arbitrary, like maybe there are some good reasons for it. Now, the one that always drives me insane is when they talk about New England should be on its own time zone. And I always, especially for the 10 years I was working in Connecticut and living in New York and didn't need to factor a time zone change into my daily commute, this would always enrage me, because like, okay, maybe what makes sense for Maine or even like Eastern Massachusetts or whatever, like I don't want to hear about that in the context of Connecticut. Now, I don't think there's actually any like agency to like do that and make New England its own time zone, but for somebody who lives so close to what would then become the border of two time zones, I really don't want to I really don't want to engage in that discussion any further, frankly. It would also mean football probably wouldn't even, that'd be the other thing. Shit wouldn't start till even later. Like football on Sundays wouldn't, because they're not going to change the rest of the country. Football on Sundays wouldn't start till 2:00 here. That's outrageous. I'm vetoing that one right now as a resident of New England for some 50 months at this point. I'm going to, not even 50 months. I don't know. I multiplied it by 16 for some reason, but for low these last 40 months, I'm going to have to veto that. But I don't know what the hell I was talking about. It's August. There's nobody listening. Whatever. Let's talk, I guess, a little bit of baseball here. We'll talk about the Yankees, who are off tonight. Actually, it's a very weird homestand for them. It's a 9-game homestand, so three-game series, but they have had an off day in between each series. So they've had 2 like non-travel off days in this homestand, which this time of year is definitely, I think, probably what you're looking for if you're in the Yankees position, but it's just a bit weird regardless. So since we last spoke, when we spoke on Monday the 27th, the Yankees had just wrapped up a 3-game series in Philadelphia where they won 2 out of 3. And then they took up a week-long residency in Chicago, and it went pretty well. They went 4-3, which is not overwhelmingly super, but good enough. The problem is, you look at some of the, if you look at the trend here, you'll notice over the 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago tonight, they were in Chicago, or they played the White Sox. They won 9-5. Next night, they win 3-2. Then the next 2 nights, they lose in extra innings. They lose in 12 innings, 6-5. And then in 11 innings, 2-1. Now we'll start with that last game of the White Sox series where they lost 2-1. And I'm going to give you the Yankees runs scored since then. And bear in mind, this is not a horrendous stretch. They won the following series against the Cubs. They lost 2 out of 3 to St. Louis, but they weren't swept. And then they won 2 out of 3 against the Braves. So, this is not a bad stretch for them, but starting with that July the 30th against the White Sox, where they lost 2-1 in 11 innings. The next night, they won 2-0, so 2 runs. They lost 5-2, 2 runs again. They won 2-1 last Sunday. Last Monday night, which we'll come back to, they lost 13-7 in a game they were down 6-0, took a 7-6 lead, and then let up 7 more runs. Then they won 2-0. They lost 3-1. They won 3-2. They won 5-4, and then they lost 2-1 in 10 innings last night, or yesterday afternoon rather. So, by my count, that is more than 3 runs once and only 3 runs once. So that is a lot, or to me, add up 1 more each. That is a lot of games they're scoring 2 runs. The fact that they're winning any of these games while they're scoring 2 runs is pretty remarkable. So they won that Cubs series, like we mentioned, 2-0, lost 5-2, won 2-1. So a 5-4 road trip where they won 2 out of the 3 series and split the other one. Philadelphia, Chicago, a good road trip. They come home for last Monday, a week ago tonight, for the Cardinals. They haven't been home in, a week and a half. And this was one of the odder games you'll ever see. And this was, before we get to that, let me go through the transactions the Yankees made at the deadline. Obviously no blockbuster moves at the deadline, but we'll get into everything that happened here. So right before the deadline, this is just August. So let's go back to July. So the Yankees, where are the trades? This was the draft. How does it not have trades? It just says transactions, but it doesn't say trades. Sorry, I'm trying to find what I'm looking for here. All right, so on August the 1st, they traded Camilo Doval, who'd been horrible for them, and cash to the Pirates for prospects or minor leaguers, I guess you could say. Then on the 3rd, they traded, again, prospects for Elio Ramos. They also made a trade with the Nationals to get Luis Garcia. And they traded, again, guys, Jake Bird's the only name I really recognize from that. But so they did make a few trades. They picked up Ramos. They picked up Garcia. That was sort of the two notable moves. Last Monday on the first game for Ramos was last Monday. And again, this game, or not Ramos, Garcia, this game was wild. The Yankees were down 7-0. Schlittler was, terrible, probably his worst start of the year. And then in the bottom of the sixth, the Yankees scored 3 runs. They got an Austin Wells 2-run home run. They got a home run from Trent Grisham. It's still 6-3 in the seventh, and they get a home run from Ryan McMahon, a home run from Caballero, a walk by Wells. Wells strikes out. Grisham doubles. Rice flies out, and then with 2 outs and 2 on, Garcia comes up and hits a 3-run homer. The Yankees have come all the way back from down 6-0 to take a 7-6 lead on a home run by a guy who's making his first appearance for the Yankees. Place is going insane. Next inning starts, and before anybody can even get in their seats, Ryan Yarbrough is pitching for the Yankees. He lets up a triple, and then they bring in this Shavili. And here's the next few batters. Walk, 3-run homer, so it's now 9-7 Cardinals. Single, 2-run homer, 11-7 Cardinals. Single, fly out, 2-run homer, 13-7. And then 2 ground outs end the inning. The Yankees are back down 13-7. They lose the game. They lose the opener of the series. They get blown out twice in the same game, which is pretty impressive. They had 2 entirely different 6-run deficits at 6-0 and 13-7. And after that game, there were some big shakeups for the Yankees. Later that night, they called up their top prospect, George Lombard Jr. They got rid of they sent Mr. Shavili down to Scranton, and they sent down to the minors the 2 biggest prospects they've had of the recent era in Anthony Volpe and Jason Dominguez. And guys get sent down to the minors and they straighten things out. And, they didn't designate them for assignment. They didn't trade them. They didn't outright cut them, whatever. But it did feel like the end for both of them, specifically for Volpe, because they bring up George Lombard, who right away makes some nice defensive plays, hits a home run. We'll talk about that game in a little while. But before we get to that, I figured we'd just kind of pause on either of these guys. We'll start with Dominguez because I want to get his minor league stats up first. He was a guy who a few years ago was like all the rage. He was a guy that people talked about, even people who didn't normally talk about prospects talked about Dominguez. I think if you floated him in a trade at the time for a guy who's a potential all-star now, you'd have been shouted out of the room. You don't give him up for any, under any conditions. 2021, and it's always hard to follow these minor league stats because guys are on a million different teams as the years go on. But 2021 is an 18-year-old rookie. He starts out in rookie ball, and then he's in Tampa. And then 2022 is a 19-year-old rookie. He's between regular A, then high A, which was the Renegades for a little while. Finishes the season with 5 games at Double A. 2023 spends most of his year at Double A, brief stop in Triple A, and then goes up to the Yankees for 8 games. Still at just 20 years old. 2024, he plays another 12.5 games with the Yankees, most of the season with Triple A. Last year, he's with the Yankees the entire season. This year opens the season at Triple A, comes up to the Yankees before being sent back down. Now, he's 23 years old. He's the one I would say, if you want to call me an alarmist for saying this was probably for him as a Yankee at 23, I think you'd certainly have a case there. But, after being up for a full, usually guys who are huge prospects and that they're happy with their development, those guys don't usually go back down after playing a full season. So, 23 and 24, where he played 8 and then 18 games respectively with the Yankees. Those are cups of coffee. That's whatever. That's just sort of getting yourself some experience. He did manage in the 23 season. He did manage to hit 4 home runs in just the 8 games he played for the Yankees. And then in 24, he had, how many at bats did he have? He had 56 at bats. So not much in 24, but last year he was, pretty good. He appeared in 123 games in 2025. He hit, where's the actual numbers? He hit 331. Oh, no, that's on base. I was going to say, no way. He hit 257 last year. He had 10 home runs and 47 RBIs in 123 games. So certainly not, numbers that you're delighted about. But, okay. It says here he finished 13th in Rookie of the Year voting, which means he got a couple of votes, but he got at least a vote or two. You know what I mean? So he probably like a 5th place vote or whatever. But some defensive issues and some maybe mental issues sort of loomed large. But then this year when he starts out and he's down and he's in the minors to start the season after being up pretty much the entire year last year, that immediately raised some concerns. And when he did ultimately come up, he hit 230. He had 6 home runs and 14 RBIs in 53 games. So, if you extrapolate that out to a full 162 game season, that's what, 18 home runs and 42 RBIs. Certainly not anything to be very happy with. So, less has been made of Dominguez, and maybe now that I'm looking at it, let me just see if they have news here on what the Yankees are thinking long term. Trying to understand Jason Dominguez's downfall. I'm just looking at an article from Yankees Go Yard. It says patience is wearing thin with New York. Yeah, this article is written by Steven Perello. Patience is wearing thin with New York outfielders Jason Dominguez, once known as the Martian for his otherworldly skills, which when combined with mostly shoddy, they give his slash line, which when combined with mostly shoddy defense coming primarily in right field, has led him to produce exactly 0 FWAR, which is some kind of wins above replacement. How did a player who is a speedy center fielder with a 5-tool potential become even average, but not even average, but replacement level? Next great hope. What happened to make him go from the next great hope from a fan base to a guy many fans would be happy to never watch again? It's funny. It says there, him and Spencer Jones have become essentially this generation's Miguel Andujar and Clint Frazier, meaning, and when you say generation, you're talking about 7 or 8 years ago, but guys that everybody was in love with and soured on very quickly. I always thought Andujar got a little bit of a raw deal there, but it's not like he turned it into a great pro career after he left the Yankees. Dominguez, factor that have killed Jason Dominguez's hype and put his Yankees future at bat in doubt. But he was obviously hyped up like crazy. Says it was the Yankees who fueled the hype around Dominguez, setting the scene for sky-high expectations. Brian Cashman called him an anomaly and praised his work ethic after his full pro season in the minors in 2021. This guy, the guy writing this article, says the Yankees bought into their own propaganda. After playing 56 games in 21, Dominguez rose 3 levels in 22, starting in single A, advancing to high A, and finishing with a 5-game cameo in double A. 23 saw him spend the majority of the season at double A before making his big league debut. Dominguez tore his UCL at the end of 23, lost a huge chunk of the 24 season. He only played 44 games in Scranton. That means he'd only played 53 AAA games before becoming a pseudo-regular for the Yankees last year in 2025. He didn't perform all that poorly last season. He was a butcher in left field, but, it goes through some of these numbers. New York loudly sought upgrades from Dominguez and ultimately stuck him in Scranton in favor of Randal Grichuk. Since he's gotten a chance this season, Dominguez's chase rate is up significantly, jumping from 30% last year to 35% this year. Contact rate outside of the strike zone has jumped. Making suboptimal contact has caused hard hit rate to fall. And obviously these are advanced statistics, but they're showing you a sort of a pattern here. Average exit velocity dropped. Seems as if Dominguez is less confident at the plate, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's an argument to be made here that possibly Dominguez was promoted too quickly and without enough minor league seasoning, and had a good enough year last year to stay up with the team, but really should have been in the minors, for most of the year. That's a tough pill to swallow for a guy who, they demoted him in early August. This isn't, he struggled in April. Let's let him get straightened out in May in the minors and then, bring him up in June for the rest of the year. Like, if he finishes out the season in AAA, the AAA season, and then comes up to the Yankees in September again, and remember, there's no 40-man anymore. So that's not even an absolute, but like, it's tough to send guys back for a long period of time, especially when they're this hyped. But, it certainly seems like it's at least somewhat possible, I guess, with Dominguez, although my optimism in that, and this may well be the Yankees' fault for the reasons we talked about, but my optimism in him being a long-term cornerstone of the Yankees, which seemed like a pretty big guarantee just a couple of years ago, is shaky at best. The other one is Volpe. Volpe, who came to the Yankees in 23 as a 22-year-old rookie. When I say came to, I mean like came up to the club. Played each of the last 3 years, he's played the whole year. He played 159 games last year, 159 games in 23, 160 games in 24, and 153 games last year. Started the year hurt this year, ended up playing 56 games before getting sent down. He won a Gold Glove in 2023, finished 8th in the Rookie of the Year voting. The batting numbers weren't anything impressive. They were terrible, actually. 209, a 283 on base percentage. He did hit 21 home runs, which I think is going to be an anomaly for him. But like the 209 is there's a reason they call the 200 line the Mendoza line, where it's like that's sort of the minimum bare acceptable. But if you're gonna have 60 RBIs and play Gold Glove shortstop as a rookie, that's enough to get by, although 167 strikeouts is obviously concerning. 24 was the batting average jumped by 35 points. So he went up to 243. No Gold Glove again, but 12 home runs, 60 RBIs. Certainly for a 24-year-old kid, 23-year-old, okay. Last year, though, the wheels fell off. He hit 212. He barely got above 200 until late in the season. His defense has been called into question in terms of his range. Let me see if they have fielding stats here. I'm sure they do. I just don't know how much I have to see if I'm going to understand the fielding stats. Errors. 17 errors in 23, 16 in 24, 19 last year, only 4 errors this year. But, just seemed like a guy who would come up in it seems like he was constantly finding himself coming up in big situations and not, being the exact guy the other team would want to see in those situations. Let's see if it says I'll finish with 1 homer. So Volpe, his first game in the minors, he did hit a home run, but he had 3 strikeouts, and an error in the field. He had only hit 1 home run this year since coming up in May. So, Volpe, especially with the ascendance of George Lombard now, seems like he's going to become a guy who goes by the wayside for the Yankees, probably in the offseason. And that the reason I sort of circle back to this, and we'll take a break and then we'll come back to the last couple of games the Yankees played last week and look at the baseball overall. But like 3 years, think about all the guys 3 years ago that if you were a Yankees fan, you would not have wanted. If you had heard a rumor 3 years ago about the Yankees potentially being able to get an all-star player, a really, really good top-of-the-line player, but they'd have to give up Dominguez and Volpe, and you reflexively would have said, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And think about what kind of player you'd be willing to settle for now to trade the two of them. The lesson in there is that, especially as fans, it is very easy to overvalue your own prospects and think that these guys are can't misses. And the fact of the matter is that most prospects not only can miss, they do miss. Just sort of the law of large numbers is that, more often than not, these guys don't pan out. So, I think not that whether fans are willing to do it or not is the difference between the deal getting made or not, but like, I think as a fan, you should want your front office to be more willing to part with prospects for stars now, unless you're a team that's like years away from competing and, you're a team like the Royals 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where it's like, we really have to strike. All these clocks need to strike at once. But if you're a team who's a contender, odds are trading those prospects for an established star is going to work out better than holding on to those prospects, which seems counterintuitive, but in reality, that's more often than not the case. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll finish up with the Yankees. We'll go from there. We'll, see how long we go until 9. Again, if anybody wants to call in, 845-416-8704. But in the meantime, we will take a break and we'll be right back on the Split Decision. All right, back here live on the Split Decision on YouTube Live, a little after 8 o'clock here on this Monday, August the 10th, 2026. We are still in sort of the dog days / doldrums of the sports calendar until we are carried away on the wings of football in a few weeks and then enter a sort of, football centric, but everything else heavy time frame for quite a while. But, really through August, it's still sort of the slow time. There's nothing really to talk about yet with this, so I won't get too into it, but the NBA schedule, at least the primetime games, are expected to be released tomorrow. Obviously, the Knicks, I'm expecting to have the maximum. I mean, whether the Knicks won the championship or not, when the Knicks have been, the last few years of the Knicks being good in the Brunson era, they had a ton of primetime games anyway. Now that will kick even more into high drive. I'm sure they will have the maximum allowable number of primetime games. You kind of speculate, you would assume the first game of the season will be the Knicks at home. That's how it was with Oklahoma City this year. You would assume it will be, the Knicks at home against a relatively, relative Eastern contender. They're not going to have them open the season at home on national TV and get their rings and do the banner and everything and then have them play the Hornets or something like that. It's obviously going to be a relatively high profile game. That said, I don't see them giving away the, absolute top of, the marquee, which realistically means the Sixers. If we're talking Eastern Conference teams this year, I could see it being the Celtics so that they could have Robinson there to get his ring and do all of that because he's signed with the Celtics now. I could see them doing Cleveland, who they beat in the Eastern Conference Finals. I could see them doing Detroit. I would think somewhere along, in that Cleveland, Detroit, Boston, I would guess it would be one of those three at Madison Square Garden opening the season. And then, the game later that evening, at 8:30 or whatever will be probably the Spurs in Oklahoma City would be my guess. And then maybe 2 days later, the Knicks on the road in another primetime game. Christmas will be interesting because for years now, really since they've gone to the 5 Christmas games, even when they were bad, the Knicks would usually play on Christmas Day at noon. Now that they're the defending champions, the question is, do they keep the Knicks in that slot or do they move them to one of the primetime slots? My guess, and actually let me check when the NFL, because the NFL's now, playing every day, even if Christmas is a Tuesday or a Wednesday, they're playing on Christmas. So, kind of unfortunate if you're a fan of other stuff that the NFL feels the need to sort of take everything over. Yeah, they're playing 3 games on Christmas, but all those games are on Netflix. Well, the first 2 are on Netflix. So the Packers Bears at 1 o'clock on Netflix, Bills Broncos at 4:30 on Netflix, and then Rams Seahawks at 8:15. So I could see them putting the Knicks in like the late, like the 5 o'clock window. I would imagine we're going to get Knicks Sixers on Christmas Day, either in Philly or at the Garden, probably at the Garden. But you would assume, I don't know if there's rules about how many of a team's matchups, like can all 4 Knicks Sixers games be on national TV? Because if they can be, they will be. Actually, I wonder if I can check last year's TV. If I can see how many games, like how many of the Knicks Celtics games, for example, last year were on national TV, or will it not give me that now that it's now that they're like past? When you look at the schedule before the season, it'll give you the national TV. Yeah, this isn't going to show it to me, but so you would imagine whatever the maximum number of Knicks Celtics games that can be on national TV is, they will be. Obviously, the rematch with the Spurs is going to be a high-profile ABC game. Probably both of them will be national TV games. So, I could keep going, but obviously they're going to play a ton of high-profile games. But it'll be cool to just see what the early schedule looks like, and then the marquee of the marquee games, like the Saturday night games at ABC and Sunday afternoons once you get to the February time frame, and obviously Christmas Day and opening night and that kind of stuff. So it's just obviously interesting to see. And I will see if there's a Tuesday or a Wednesday in mid-January or early February where they're playing Portland again. I've seen them play Portland the last 2 years. Normally Washington is my throwaway line, but with the number one pick and some of the moves they made, now they have Trae Young too. So the Washington ticket's probably not the gimme that it was for the cheapest you're going to find. But yeah, if the Knicks are playing Portland or Utah or maybe even the Hawks. So they played the Hawks in the playoffs last year, but who's going to be an easy? The Bucks will not be a bad ticket to try to get this year. See if I can get in the building for less than $200, or if that's extremely wishful thinking at this point. So we'll keep an eye on that. But back to the Yankees. So we talked about the game Monday night. Tuesday was a whole new era for the Yankees as George Lombard came up. And in the, I believe, second inning, he made a really nice double play. Like went to his right into the hole towards third base, got to a ball that started a really nice double play. Then came up in the fifth inning and hit a home run with his family there. I did not realize, and maybe I should have, that his dad is the bench coach for the Detroit Tigers. So they said he had gotten to Seattle and turned around to come to New York to watch his son's major league debut. His younger brother was making his pro debut in the minors that same night, and he also hit a home run. So Yankees won 2-0 against St. Louis. They got a good start from Weathers, 6 innings, 4 hits. And then in the rubber match on Thursday, they again were betrayed by their offense. Couldn't get anything going. They lose 3-1. They waste another good, decent enough pitching performance from Will Warren, who went 5 1/3. So they lose that series to St. Louis. Welcome in the Braves to finish off the homestand. And this was a really good series. Every game was a one-run game. Yankees, it was 0-0 in this game on Friday night until the 8th. The starting pitcher for the Yankees was Max Fried, who was good, 6 1/3, 3 hits, no runs. But in the 8th, the Braves get a home run. In the 9th, the Braves get a home run. It's 2-0. The Yankees, after getting Lombard on, Wells doubles in Lombard, and then Wright singles in Wells, ties the game at 2. We go to extra innings, and in the bottom of the 10th, McMahon hits a sac fly that gets Garcia in. So the Yankees come from behind, down 2-0 in the 9th, and win that game. Saturday was a little bit more of a back and forth affair. The Yankees, you would have to describe this as exploding for 5 runs, given their recent offensive output. Cole went 7 innings, 2 earned runs, 9 strikeouts. Yankees got a big game from Spencer Jones. Lombard hit another home run. Rice hit a home run. The Yankees hold the Braves off 5-4. And then yesterday they lose 2-1 in 10. Nothing until the 7th. Braves go ahead in the 7th, 1-0. Grisham homers in the 8th to tie it. In the 10th, the Braves get a run in, and the Yankees can't do anything. Schlittler was again great. 7 innings pitched, 3 hits, 1 run. His ERA stands now at 2.21. Not enough to get the team the win on this night, but the Yankees did win the series. So where the Yankees stand right now is at 66-52. So that's 118 games, which means they have 44 games left to play. So just over a quarter of the season left. By the end of this next series, it'll be a quarter of the season. They finish up this homestand tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday against Seattle, who's been struggling lately. I believe they're under 500. I believe they're playing horrible. Yeah, they've lost they've lost 4 in a row. They've lost what looks like 7 out of 10. They're 7 games under 500, one of the league's most disappointing teams this year, given that they were very close to getting to their first World Series last year. So the Yankees, for the next little while, they're home against a struggling Seattle team. Then they go on the road against Toronto and Baltimore, both of whom are struggling. And then Toronto again at home in August 21st, 22nd, 23rd. So the next 2 weeks for the Yankees are going to be crucial because they're not hitting. They're winning more than they have any business winning while they're not hitting. But at the same time, they're falling ever further back at Tampa. They're 6 games back in the loss column. Tampa Bay's won 6 in a row. The Red Sox, who we'll talk about in a minute, despite having lost 2 in a row, continue to be playing at an absolutely torrid pace. They are only a game back of the Yankees in the loss column right now, a game and a half overall. They are, unless you think they've totally exhausted themselves with this run the last couple of months, they are going to blow past the Yankees. Will they be able to make up 7 games in 44? Certainly if they continue playing at the pace they were on in the second half of June and all of July, yes, they'll blow past everybody if they continue at this pace, but probably not realistic to expect them to continue just at 130 win pace. But let's just say they still play really well, but cool down a little. It'll be a challenge for them to catch Tampa Bay, but it won't be a challenge for them to catch the Yankees. So where I realistically see the Yankees settling in now is the second wild card, which is the 5 seed, which would probably result at the moment in a 3-game series with the Red Sox at Fenway Park. And you can't feel real good about that, given how good the Red Sox have been the last couple of months of the season, recognizing, though, that there's still, 7 weeks of the season left or whatever it is. But, the Yankees just, I know they're missing their whole lineup, but none of those guys are coming back imminently. They did get some good news with Judge. Right after I basically was writing Judge off for the season, he was cleared to begin light activities, which includes outdoor running and upper body resistance work. And that was 5 days ago on August 5th. Again, that does not mean he's a week away from starting a rehab assignment. I still maintain the earliest realistic scenario for Judge is going to be the playoffs. Some people may say they can get him back by mid-September. I think that's probably the most realistic, realistic scenario is he comes back with a couple of weeks left in the regular season. So still, 6 weeks away. They're not going to get Bellinger. Says Bellinger took live batting practice Wednesday for the first time since landing on the injured list, July 26th. So that's actually good news because that's only about 2 weeks. And he's taking live batting practice, and I believe we were told 4 to 6 weeks originally. So maybe we can put some hope on the fact that it's closer. I think most fans, I don't know if this is just the Yankees or anybody, but when you hear 4 to 6 weeks in your head, you think, okay, 8 weeks. So 4 to 6 weeks, if it ends up actually being 4 weeks, would be really encouraging because it would mean we're halfway through it. And then Stanton, gotta love this phrasing. Yankees manager Aaron Boone said Saturday that Stanton started the introduction to running some bases. Okay, so that sounds real comforting. That, Stanton we can write off. And then just for other injuries, Rodon allowed 3 runs on 3 hits and 2 walks while striking out 4 in his first rehab assignment with Scranton Wilkes-Barre on Saturday. So you would like to assume he is also fairly close to returning. The Yankees have not had, they started the season with Cole still hurt and Rodon got hurt as well. Basically, right before Cole came back, Fried got hurt. And then by the time Fried came back, Rodon's on the IL. So they've not had a, reason to, they've not had to make the decision on which one of these guys will get bumped from the rotation when the time comes. If you look, the Yankees starting pitching has been damn good this year. Obviously, Cam Schlittler at 10-6 with a 2.21 ERA. He's not going anywhere. Garrett Cole is not going out of the rotation with a 3.35. Fried, 2.88. So what you're left is with, assuming Rodon comes back in, let's say, a couple of weeks, you're left with whether you bump Weathers or Warren. Warren's ERA is 4.18 to Weathers 3.79. You know, they've both made 22 starts this year, so they both made pretty much the full battery of starts. The only guy who's pitched more has been Schlittler, but I think Warren and Weathers have both been skipped a couple of times due to off days and the All-Star break and stuff like that. Weathers' numbers are better in pretty much every metric, although they're fairly close pretty much across the board. I think you would have to go to Weathers and give Will Warren a spot in the bullpen when the time comes. And, you know, again, you may run into a time where, especially if you're not in a division race down the stretch, where it may be prudent to skip Schlittler one or two times in the rotation because you start to bump up against these guys who are having really good rookies or really good seasons, you know, in their, this is not Schlittler's rookie season, but it's his first full, season. Last year he made 14 starts. This is his first, you know, he's already made 25 starts this year, and there's still 2 months left in the season. So, you know, innings pitched for him so far this year is, how many innings has he thrown? He's thrown 146 innings so far this year. Last year he threw 73. So he's already in the majors. Obviously he pitched in the minors last year, but he's already doubled up his major league innings this year from last year. So you'd have to imagine they're going to try and, you know, give him some extra days, if not outright skipping him in the rotation a couple of times. So you're going to need 6 starters is what I'm saying. You've needed 6 starters up to this point, but at some point when Rodon comes back, one of them, and it's going to have to be Will Warren, is going to get bumped for at least a little while. So that's kind of where we are with the Yankees. Let's take a quick look at the standings, and then we'll go from there. I mentioned in the AL East right now, it is Tampa Bay, still 6 games up in the loss column on the Yankees. They're 7 games up in the loss column on Boston. Baltimore, 4 games under 500. Toronto, 7 games under. So from a division standpoint, they don't bear mentioning anymore. AL Central, you got the White Sox at 61 and 56. Detroit, who sort of waved the flag on the season when they traded Skubal, 2 games under 500. They have won 7 out of 10 and, you know, sit just 4 games back in the loss column. Minnesota and Cleveland, both 3 games under. Cleveland's really been dreadful lately, and then Kansas City is way back. So 4 teams all within a couple of games of each other here, but all also within a couple of games of 500. Out in the West, Houston and Texas basically with identical records. Texas has 1 less win, so they're even in the loss column, just percentage points separating them. And then Seattle, who we mentioned, has really struggled lately. They have fallen 7 games under 500, but only technically 4 games out, because right now Houston is just a game over 500, and that's good enough for first place in the American League West. A's, Seattle, both way back from a wild card standpoint in the American League right now. Yankees and Boston sitting fairly comfortable ahead. Right now, Texas at 59 and 59 would be that number 6 seed. And then you got Detroit, Minnesota, Cleveland, and Baltimore, all within 2 games of the last wild card spot. So, you know, and then if you go to 3.5, Seattle and Toronto. So everybody but Kansas City, the A's, and the Angels are within 3.5 games of the last wild card spot with, you know, about a quarter of the season to go. In the NL, you got the Phillies who, you know, the Braves rather, who've opened back up a 9-game lead on the Phillies. The Phillies, you know, still 7 games over 500, playing good, but dug themselves a hole early in the year, really came charging back. I don't know how small the lead got to, but I think it was like 3.5 games at one point. And the Braves have managed to balloon that back out to a healthy 9-game in the loss column lead. In the Central, Milwaukee 6 up on the Cubs. The Cubs endured a pretty rough streak for a while, but they've somewhat righted the ship. St. Louis, 59 and 59. they are now well out of any contention for the division. But when we get to the wild card, we'll talk about still being somewhat in it. Even Pittsburgh still only 4 games under 500. Cincinnati 5 games under 500. So all of those teams are, within striking distance of 500, even the last place Reds. And then out west, the Dodgers, who've been brutal lately, who've lost 8 out of 10 games, have seen their lead actually shrink to just 7. Now, that's still a big lead, or 8 games in the loss column. That's still a big lead, but the Dodgers do not usually lose 8 of 10, especially after they just acquired Skubal. The team closest to them is Arizona at 63 and 56. San Diego at 62 and 57 is in the mix, and then we don't need to mention San Francisco or Colorado. The NL wild card at the moment would be the Cubs with a huge cushion on that. Then you'd have Arizona and Philadelphia both in the 5th and 6th spot with identical 63 and 56 records. San Diego only a game out. Miami only 3 games out. St. Louis 3.5. And then even Washington, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati all somewhat hovering around it. Although when you get down to Washington, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati, there's a lot of teams, even though they're only 4 or 5 games back, there's a lot of teams in their way. And then you can basically lop off the Mets, San Francisco, and Colorado at this point. So only 3 teams in each league really, truly, truly out of it. So that makes up, 6 of the 30 teams in baseball with a quarter of the season left. Now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, if you're still 6.5 back and you're in 11th in the league, you haven't lost any ground, but you've lost some time and you haven't gained any ground. So, we can probably, within a couple of weeks, start lopping a few of those teams off. But for the moment, at least on paper, you've got more teams in it than you would think. I mentioned the Yankees are off tonight. Red Sox down 1-0 to the Blue Jays at the moment. Let's do this. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back. We'll see how much time, we'll see what else we want to get into. We might kind of mix things up a little bit and just talk about a few other things that are maybe tangentially related to sports, but we'll keep things going for at least a little while longer. We'll see how things develop. And we'll be right back on the Split Decision on YouTube Live.
Isn't the Wonderland I grew up with.
They want us perfect.
All right, back here live on the Split Decision here on Facebook Live. We got up to and including 28 minutes left, but we'll see about that. I was just kind of thinking I've been doing. So we did a podcast episode last week. Recorded it, hasn't come out yet on the Shot Heard Around the World, the 1951 playoff series, or really, I mean, the Shot Heard Around the World is a home run, but it also, when you talk about the Shot Heard Around the World, you're talking about the whole 1951 NL season between the Dodgers and Giants. And, you know, it's one of my favorite stories, things to talk about from a sports standpoint. You know, anybody who knows me knows I love New York baseball history, specifically when it comes to the Giants, and even more specifically when it comes to the Polo Grounds. As you can see in this room, right there is there we go. Right there is a picture of the Polo Grounds in New York City, or was in New York City, obviously. So that was really fun to do, kind of a story that maybe had been gone over by people, maybe had obviously been gone over by people plenty before, but, you know, was something me and my brother would really want to talk about. It's 75 years ago this year, the 1951 baseball season, you know, and just a really cool one that I have to start editing so it gets out in time. But, you know, please listen to that. We got some other cool ones coming out pretty soon. We just did one of our last games episodes. We got one on what the heck was the last one we did? Why can't I remember? The last season of the ABA, the 1975-76 ABA season. We recorded that recently. My brother's going to be working on that one. That one will come out. And then I have I'm going to be a guest on a podcast this coming Sunday. We're recording it Sunday. I think theirs probably come out a lot quicker than Dan and I's do, but Dana, who is a frequent caller to this show, him and his partner Charles do a show on the Sports History Network as well. We always say it's similar to ours, not in terms of like they're a lot of the shows on the sports. Sorry, their show is called Historically Speaking Sports. Their show is similar to ours in that most of the shows on like the Sports History Network are about very specific topics, whether there's a format to them. You know, we're going down the best player to wear each number from each team, or, you know, there's guys who do really like impressive podcasts, but they're very narrowly focused about, you know, one guy is like the definitive expert on the history of the Chicago Cardinals, like when the now Arizona Cardinals, before they were in Arizona, before they were in St. Louis, they were the Chicago Cardinals, you know, who is like probably there's lots of guys who talk about, you know, the Pottsville Maroons and football in a certain era, or, you know, very specific things. My brother and I, Hello Old Sports, we kind of touch on many, many different things. And Dana's show is kind of like that as well. Dana and Charles' show. And they're having me on to talk about so they're both, I don't think they begrudge me saying it's a little bit older than me. And they both, I know Dana's from Louisiana. I'm assuming Charles is from that general area as well, but I could be wrong on that. But they are going to do an episode on Southern wrestling from the territory era. The specifically, they said the 70s and early 80s. And for anybody who doesn't know, the way that worked was prior to the big WWF expansion in 1984 or 83, 84, when Vince McMahon Jr. took over the company from his father and quote unquote took it nationally. Before that, the WWF was a huge territory. It was the Northeast corridor, DC all the way up to Maine, as far west as Pittsburgh and a little bit of West Virginia, and, you know, up through some of central New York, not all the way to Buffalo, like, you know, that kind of thing. So they were obviously a big territory, big metropolitan markets, but they were still a territory. And then in the Midwest, Minnesota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Chicago, for the most part, we could get into Chicago, kind of not, but like whatever, was the AWA, the American Wrestling Association. That's where Hulk Hogan was before he went to the WWF in 1984. And then there were ones out on the West Coast, but most of them by the 60s and 70s, most of them by the late 70s were totally gone, except for Portland. You know, the one that was in LA was pretty much gone. The one that was in San Francisco was pretty much gone. But what there was a ton of territories in the South. Territories that spanned multiple states, territories that only were one city, and kind of run as like a little fiefdom. Like Houston is a great example of that. Houston was its own entity. You know, within Texas alone, you had, at various points, you had West Texas, which was Amarillo and Lubbock, you know, and then you had the Houston office, which was kind of its own thing. And then there was a San Antonio area territory for a while. And then, you know, there was ones in Mississippi, but there were bigger ones. And the three they wanted to talk about are, by my mind, 3 of the 5 most important Southern territories, I guess I would say. And that's Georgia Championship Wrestling, based out of Atlanta, as you could imagine. That was significant because they were on, as early as 1972, they were on the channel that became the Superstation. And when the Superstation went national, there were some people accusing them of violating sort of the orders of, you don't run TV in other people's markets. But the argument was like, well, you know, I'm airing it on a Georgia station using Georgia wrestlers. The fact that it goes everywhere isn't really my whatever, but started a very long relationship of Ted Turner to professional wrestling, which would culminate with him buying WCW in 1988. So Georgia Championship Wrestling, based out of Atlanta, is one we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about World Class Championship Wrestling, which was based out of Dallas. And that was for anybody who's seen the movie or heard of the movie that came out a few years ago called The Iron Claw, that was about the Von Erich family, the family that owned World Class. Fritz Von Erich was, and that's always one thing you got to kind of love about some of these wrestling stories, even a story as tragic as the Von Erichs. You know, a big part of it is that they're these, you know, kind of Texas good old boys, and they were legitimately. But unless you know it, or just aren't thinking that hard about it, you're like, wait a minute. The patriarch of this family, these Texas good old boys, is named Fritz Von Erich. And the reason is that Fritz Von Erich, or Jack Adkisson, was, during the early days of his career, traveling all throughout the country as the hated Nazi villain Fritz von Erich. And when he decided to move back to Texas and buy his own territory, the name came with him. And in true pro wrestling fashion, 20 years of being a goose-stepping Nazi went by the boards in one quick angle, and suddenly he was the most beloved guy in Texas, the guy with all the sons from Texas, and, that the owner of the promotion, and, this source of tremendous civic pride, but still carrying the name from when he was the Nazi wrestler from the 50s and 60s. Fritz von Erich had 5 sons, and all were involved in the wrestling business through in one way or another. 4 of them were wrestlers. The one son only peripherally got involved, but was involved with the company, and 4 of them died. 3 of them by suicide. One of them either by natural causes or by a drug overdose, depending on, either natural causes or a drug overdose, depending on which version of the story you believe. But basically, by the time he was in his 30s, there was one surviving Von Erich brother, and but they were kind of a force in terms of these sort of young, kick-ass, good guys that, like Kerry Von Erich, the biggest star of them, came out to Modern Day Warrior, or came out to Tom Sawyer. They all had sort of rock songs, and the girls and the partying and everything, which led to their downfall, but like very different presentation than you were used to in a lot of wrestling in the 70s and early 80s. And then the third one is Mid-South Wrestling, which was left a very lasting legacy considering how short a time it actually existed for, but primarily based in Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas, and then a little bit in Houston, Texas. But lots of stars got their start there. Lots of innovative angles while still being very traditional. So I'm excited to tap into, during my podcast with my brother, I will occasionally throw in random wrestling references, usually to get a rise out of my brother. Because he's a fan of a lot of the wrestling I am, but maybe not as much as what I'm gonna talk about on Dana and Charles's show. And then whenever we do a year, like, we're doing all of sports in the year 1975 or whatever, I will mention what went on in wrestling. But we never have, nor will we probably ever do a full episode about specific wrestling topics. So when Dana asked if I would be willing to lend my expertise to his program, I was more than happy to do so. So I'm really looking forward to that this coming Friday, or this coming Sunday night. We'll record it, and I will obviously let everybody know when it is up and posted, and ask people to please give a listen to that, even if you're not, even if the subject of Southern pro wrestling in the 70s and early 80s on its surface may not be exciting to you. If you listen to other ones of our podcasts, maybe the topic initially didn't grab you, but maybe it was, a little more interesting to you once we got into it and talked about it and stuff. So, we hope you'll, I hope you will give that a listen. With that, I guess we'll wrap up. I could certainly get into a few other things, but I think it's probably good for us to bring things to a close tonight. I know we are still in kind of a dead time, and will be for a few more weeks. That's why we'll be on next week on the 17th, take the 24th off, come back strong on the 31st. And then from there, we will be right into a new part of the year for sports. So I want to thank everybody who listens both tonight and in the future, listens to this later on, or just any other episodes. Again, please listen to the Hello Old Sports podcast that I do with my brother. Please listen to Dana and Charles's show, the Historically Speaking Sports podcast. And that's the other thing I would say is They do a really good show, so even if my appearance on it is not necessarily
Innovation
something
is the
that's,
key to our company's success. I need a
that's your cup
smart
of tea or something that you really have any desire to listen to me talk about territory era pro wrestling from the South, maybe take a look. Again, it's on the Sports History Network, just like our podcast is. Maybe take a look and see if they have a topic that is a little more of interest to you. Although I do hope that once it's recorded, you give Luke a chance as well. But other than that, we will sign off for the night. We will say goodnight, and we will see you 1 week from tonight, Monday, August the 17th at 7 o'clock. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Have a good week. See you next week.